Hey Graham, welcome to Virtual Days, Vivid ADM.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you. I've asked every speaker this question, so I thought I might as well continue. Is there any key takeaway you want people to take from your session that you want them really to focus in on?
That's a good question. I would say really the main thing I'd like to get across is not to be afraid. If like me, prior to getting involved with LeanFT, you've spent years maybe working with tools such as UFT, where it's all self-contained and it's aimed at automation engineers. Don't be afraid to expand your horizons and start to look at a product like LeanFT, which really is in a development environment. There are lots of things to learn. It's just a very different way of viewing stuff. But you just have to do it bit by bit, see what works, what stuff you need to throw away and redo, and then you get to love it like I have.
Very cool. So one of the knocks against UFT for developers were you were never going to be able to get them to install software in their machine to run your test. So it sounds like LeanFT is a solution that plugs into a developer's IDE and ecosystem, and then they can use it just like any other library they would use in Java or C#. So are you developers actually using LeanFT is my question.
Sorry, your question was why use LeanFT? I didn't quite catch that.
Are any of your developers actually using LeanFT now that you actually made it
Okay.
so they can use automation with their IDEs and such?
Okay, yeah, and that was kind of an exciting thing for me because I did the proof of concept with LeanFT, I'm going to say about a year or so ago. And so at that point, it was just me that had worked with it. I loved it. I could see the benefits of it. But it took a little while, I think, for anyone to pick it up to use as a pilot. And now we've got a few developers that are just taking a look at this. And I wanted to make sure that they had the same passion for it as me. And sure enough, the feedback we got was really good. They loved it, even though for an average developer, they're not used to the complexities of trying to automate regression testing, except for when we complain that we want IDs and we want this and we want that. This was good for them to actually get involved in it, and they took to it very quickly. So far, I'm really pleased with it, and I want to see where it's going to go to. At the same time, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think this is a good opportunity for those that are very proficient with something like UFT and they do a lot of in-depth coding. Maybe like for us, we have a couple of applications that are very complex and you have to do a lot to be able to get your automated test reliably working with it. I think it's good now to have those that the automation engineers moving into more of a development environment and the developers kind of working in to understand some of the complexities and get involved in building some of the tests themselves, because it really does do what we've been looking for so many years in QA, which is to bring the developers and the testers closer together to be able to really knock stuff out quickly and reliably.
So what I love about vendor solutions like LeanFT or UFT is it takes care of a lot of the things for you behind the scenes. And it has extra things like an object repository, an object map. And it sounds like from UFT to LeanFT, they carried over that concept where if someone's using straight Selenium, sometimes they don't know, do I use XPath, do I use CSS? But it sounds like LeanFT uses the same kind of background where multiple elements in order to locate a field, so it makes it more reliable. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's right. I'm sounding like a salesman from Micro Focus, and I say that all the time at work, just because I love the products.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I like about LeanFT, or UFT Developer as it's now called, is that it really allows you to do it which way you want. For example, you could use the object identification center, put it into record mode, and it's recording your interactions with the application in C# or Java, and JavaScript as well, I believe, but I don't dabble in that area because it doesn't work with our framework as well. But you can do it that way and end up with code that you can then manipulate afterwards So you don't have to use the application model, the object repository. But it also, if you want to take that next step, it's very quick to do, and the benefits are, in my mind, you have to do it. It's one of the best selling points of using LeanFT.
Very nice. So, Graham, let's get to one of our questions. It's from Carlos, and Carlos wants to know, do you have any problems or issues using Cucumber plus LeanFT, UFT dev integration with ALM Quality Center?
I have to, the first, I'll answer that in two stages. First of all, the integration with LeanFT and SpecFlow or Cucumber, depending on which environment you're working in. I'm probably going to make some of the Micro Focus guys that I've worked with in the past chuckle when I said I was actually very, I'm not sure what the word is. I wasn't sure about whether it was a smart move to use Cucumber. And literally I had them come back and say, I know you feel this way, but honestly, give it a shot, have a play with it. And once I'd worked with it for a little while, I grew to love it. And I'm like, okay, I really see the benefits here. And LeanFT works wonderfully with it. The second part to the question was when you start to integrate it with ALM. And I've got to say, the work that we've done so far, really, we have not involved ALM in the process. I've been doing it purely in Visual Studio and compiling and sharing that way. So I can't answer to that. But what I will say is we saw a demo of ALM Octane as opposed to the classic ALM. And it seems like that also gives you a lot of benefits that make sure your syntax is correct and kind of helps you with the development of your feature files. So while I haven't had a chance to play with it, that's going to be the next thing. Hopefully next year, we're going to start looking at ALM Octane, and that should certainly work. And if your question, Carlos, was relating to classic ALM, I unfortunately I can't help you. Maybe there's someone else here that can help you there.
Very cool. So my only knock against Micro Focus, HP, Mercury is they always are changing the names. So I don't know if I'm using the right names anymore. So correct me if I'm wrong. But so I guess one thing benefit or knock against Selenium was that it's not a knock. It's just it's only made for web browser automation. And as you know, working in a big enterprise, you need to test everything, a mainframe, a mobile app, or a WPF application or whatever, Windows app. So with LeanFT, does it have all the plugins that someone may be familiar with what I used to know as UFT or QTP?
I only worked with the few applications or whatever that I needed to for the proof of concept. But my understanding is yes, that and hopefully we can get clarification from the other people on this call. But my understanding is it uses the same UFT engine under the covers, and so therefore, yes, all those plugins are available. And that's really been the selling point for us, as I mentioned earlier, sticking with UFT. We have probably one of the widest range of technologies that we've used in our company that I've ever come across. And having one tool that does it all is great. And that was one of the reasons why it was, for me, a natural progression to look at LeanFT. So I think the answer is yes, but I would like someone else to clarify if they've used some of the other add-ins outside of web and just Windows applications as standard.
Awesome. So how seriously did you try Selenium or Appium before you said, well, LeanFT is definitely the way to go? Did you do a proof of concept, or did you just know, just based on your environment, there's no way Selenium would even work for you if you brought it into the company?
I did an evaluation of Selenium a long time ago, so maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. And I mean, yeah, it's good. It does a lot for free, and I don't know whether I should admit to knowing that UFT, for example, it's still using the WebDriver behind the scenes for Chrome and Firefox and Edge. So it's good that we have those capabilities, but as you said, exactly earlier, we also have a need to test other kinds of applications. Not everything is web. So that was one limitation. Also, having something that just really fitted into the development environment as well as LeanFT or UFT developer does. It's just a whole different ball game. That the idea of record and recording your C# or your Java or whatever, and the object repository, all those other features, the object spy, these are all things that really speed you to where you need to be and make your test more maintainable. So I've got nothing against Selenium, and it certainly has its uses, but for the type of applications that we need to test, LeanFT is just a lot more, it gives us a lot more benefit.
So how easy is it to get started, or how do you typically use it? Is it just importing a language binding and then doing browser dot, and then you have all the functionality that you normally would have in UFT or QTP?
For me, it was a little painful because there was a lot of new, I don't know what the word is, new concepts. There was a lot of stuff that I'd heard of and had a vague idea about, but when you start to put it into practice, you start asking the deeper questions. Well, where does this fit into it? How do I get this to integrate with it? So there was a lot of trial and error. I did have good support from the SWAT team at Micro Focus, which was definitely appreciated. And then as I found that stuff would work, I would just document it. So if anyone wanted it, I could give some basic steps out. If you wanted to contact me through Vivit, I'd be happy to share the steps that I found worked either in Eclipse or Visual Studio. I didn't touch IntelliJ, but I looked at those two IDEs. And it really is pretty simple once you know what you're doing. Once you have that little checklist of, okay, so I add this extension, I add that extension, I reboot, boom, now everything's working. Oh, yes, it's telling me LeanFT's there, and so on. So it's actually pretty straightforward. The next step is that you, for example, in Visual Studio, you do File New Project, and under Test, you'll see that there are some template projects for LeanFT, and you choose the one that's most applicable to you, and then you end up with these basic files with some comments in, and then hopefully what I demonstrated earlier of what code you put into which library, that will be helpful, because for me, I had an idea, I did stuff, and then started to realize, actually it's more appropriate to move it here and there, and that's where there seemed to be a real lack of standards available. So it was a lot of trial and error, but if anyone wants to see what works for us, go back and look at the video of my presentation and step through it and have a look at the code, or ping me, and I'd be happy to send you the few steps to set it up in your environment.
Awesome. So I'm a little ignorant here, but I assume when you give it to a developer, with QTP or UFT, you had to install software, but I still think, or there used to be, you had to install an agent in order to get LeanFT to work. How much manual interaction is that? Is that an automated process? You go to a developer, pull it down from my repo, and bam, everything's ready? Or do they need to do anything extra to get that agent configured and running?
Yeah, so when you install LeanFT, the first time you then, once you've installed it, the first time you bring up Chrome, it'll prompt you, do you want to add the Micro Focus agent? It's the same agent regardless of whether you're using LeanFT or UFT. So it's the same process. It's a very simple, quick install, and that, bear in mind, is for the developer or dev tester to set that up in their environment. When it comes to actually executing, there's you basically compile all this and you can execute it on another machine, and that setup is a lot more simple. So pretty much the same as UFT.
All right, so I know another question people always ask, because there is an agent involved, and I think it's taking the C# or Java and it's interpreting it in UFT and whatever it's doing in the background. Is it slower than straight UFT, or is it the same? Do you not know a difference at all?
I didn't really notice much of a difference in speed, I got to be honest. The fact that once you take your test in Visual Studio or, as an example, and you're compiling it, so your test is going to run quicker, but the interaction with the browser, to me, that seemed about the same.
Awesome. So, Graham, we have another question. And the question is, your test lab is made up of virtual machines, but what about containers or machines in the cloud?
That's a long subject. Okay, so our automation framework, Test Factory, originally it was built around UFT. Wow, I hope we have enough time to go through this.
We have enough time for sure. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So the origins of this was based on UFT and on running on laptops. Then we moved to having virtual machines so that people worldwide would have the same experience, the same connectivity, and so on. More recently, we have, I think I did a proof of concept with UFT and cloud-based machines, but there are several things that caused problems back when I did the POC for that. And the problems were really that the applications that we were testing were only available within our network. So for that reason, all of the test executions that are going on a cloud-based machine, no problems with setting it up and running it. You know, you still set up your virtual network, your load balancers, and your VMs in the cloud. But the problem became when it needed to go back to our data center, which is in Atlanta, through a VPN, because first of all, there's a performance hit, and secondly, there's a cost involved. So at that point, when we looked at it, I said, this has got great potential. We want to be able to do this, but we're going to shelve it until we've got applications that we need to test that are themselves out, in the internet, not on our private network. Now, bringing that more up to date, we're certainly looking at the possibilities of running our tests in the cloud, and we've actually got applications that are now also out of our network and available there. And also looking at containers, that's something else we've started to play with too. So there's a lot going on. It's very early days for me personally with that stuff. And that is definitely my goal for 2020. But the heart of our framework, which is either the .NET or the Java common library that we have, I've had to make a lot of changes to that to add a certain amount of, if you like, artificial intelligence to figure out what is my environment. So if I see that I'm on our network, and I can see that I can talk to our SQL database for our website, and I can see that I can reach this server and that server, and I can get my test data from here, then it works as normal. But if it sees, well, I'm trying to communicate with our SQL database and I'm not able to, so from now on, I'm going to assume that I'm working on a container that doesn't have access to it or something like that. So there does need to be the logic within the framework to know what environment it's working in. So where I work is in the center of excellence. So we're trying to support all different projects. Some might be cloud-based, some might be mobile, some might be websites and terminal emulation or whatever. And we have to make sure that our framework is adaptable for whichever environment it's working in. And that has been quite a challenge. But I do believe that we're there, and I'm excited to be taking it onto that next level. So ask me the same question in a year's time, and I'll have all the answers for you. For right now, it's like, well, so far, so good.
Awesome. So our next question is from Chris, and Chris wants to know, your scheduling website database, is that homegrown or an available solution?
It is homegrown. So many years ago, we were using ALM to do our executions, and the problem was that every day we had to come in and change the date and time that it's going to run for the next day. And if back then a lot of the tests that we had were running on a daily basis, so it didn't make a lot of sense to have the scheduling mechanism through ALM that way. And I put in multiple requests to back then HP saying, please, actually, I think it was even back in the days of Mercury, please, can we have ALM have a more sophisticated scheduling mechanism? And at that point, it just didn't look like it was going to happen. So that's why, as part of our framework, we have homegrown stuff. I am definitely not a web developer by far, but I managed to cobble something together along with our SQL database so that it would keep a history, allow you to run stuff straight on demand, or run it to a schedule every day or certain days at certain times. So that bit was homegrown. However, nowadays ALM has a really good scheduling mechanism built within it. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel and go back to doing it a different way, so we've carried on using our framework. But if you're using ALM, you have all those capabilities now to do all of that, and you don't need to have this external piece that we do.
Nice. And I'm actually old enough to remember that. That's been a request open since probably 2000 for better scheduling. So that's so funny that you actually had to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Graham, next question is, how easy is it for an automation engineer to use? How easy is it for an automation engineer to use LeanFT in your experience?
I would say it is challenging. So we had the development manager for LeanFT come over and visit us, which was kind of exciting, and he was pleased and surprised to see, from what he'd been hearing, and we were a good example of this, how they'd originally anticipated this was going to be a tool for developers. So a developer would use LeanFT and an automation engineer would be using UFT. So they were very surprised in the early days to see that people were jumping in as automation engineers and wanting to play with LeanFT and get really serious with the development side. I think since those days, it's pretty obvious now. There's a lot more documentation. There's more how-to videos. The support is definitely more geared towards being able to help answer these kinds of questions. So I would say it is tricky. Don't think it's going to be something you're going to pick up overnight. But if I can do it, anyone can do it. And it's just a case of dipping your toe in, seeing how it goes, and seeing how you like it. And there are people that you can reach out to for help. And there's the almighty Google as well. That's been my friend for quite a while. So that was another reason I was pleased to get involved in Vivit and be asked to present here. Is I want as many people as possible to get involved in LeanFT as well, so that we can build out our community. So that there are more of us that we can kind of swap stories and get ideas from one another to really help that process. So yes, you can do it. Yes, it's going to have some challenges for you, but just with a little bit of head down and enjoy yourself, I think you'll find it's not that bad. If you have any level of coding experience, like I say, if I can do it, you can do it.
Very cool. So I guess this is a pet peeve of mine, so maybe I'm wrong here. Someone has a similar question around Cucumber using feature files to drive your test. Would you recommend it? And if so, are you using it just as an automation front end, or are you actually using it as a behavior collaboration type tool?
I went from really not wanting to do it to loving it. I think it really depends on what it is that you're trying to automate. If you're just trying to do something that's only going to be used for a short period of time, it's just, if you like a quick and dirty, no, you don't want to be using Cucumber. But if it's something where you're in more of an agile or safe environment where you want to have that collaboration, exactly as you said, I would say that is the real selling point. Everyone can look at these feature files and understand them. So it can be shared by development, by QA, by project managers, whoever can see this. And as long as you're using a tool that makes sure you don't go and mess up the syntax of it, that was my earliest concern. I'm like, why would you have something where someone could accidentally put then rather than a when and mess up their tests and whatever? But with tools like Octane, and I got to say SpecFlow is very, very good for this too. It really helps to make sure that those feature files are intact, that they work, everyone can share them, and it's just a great way of doing it. Prior to Cucumber, I was convinced that the only way to do this is use spreadsheets. Put all your data into spreadsheets and you know exactly what you're doing. But there is a lot of value. I would recommend anyone that's looking at LeanFT, I would suggest Cucumber or SpecFlow. Play with it for a day or two and see what you think. And I grew to love it very quickly.
Now, you said you grew to love it. Who convinced you to use it? Was it a best practice HP or a Micro Focus recommended, or that someone on your team recommended?
I could actually name the name. So okay. Mason in the UFT or the Micro Focus SWAT team that was helping us with some very complex challenges that we had with the application. It was a lot of WPF controls, and that's how he got involved. And then as I started to really get into LeanFT, we've met several times, and he's helped me through some of the early challenges. And he was the one that really kind of looked at me and said, "Are you sure you don't want to be using Cucumber?" And I'm like, "I'm absolutely sure." And he goes, "Are you really sure?" And that was it. So I was coerced into it and grew to love it.
Very cool. So what I love about using Selenium or Appium or LeanFT in the language that you're used to, like C# or Java, is that you can use all these other libraries and add other things that are not necessarily Micro Focus. It could be an open source thing. One that comes to mind is REST testing, even though I know UFT has an API REST testing aspect of it. So I guess I'm just saying all this for leading up to Carlos's question, which is, considering the ideal test automation pyramid, which tool do you suggest for API test level and UI test level, UFT developer or UFT? Because both of them, we can do it. So
I'm probably not the best person to answer that, and the reason being is that traditionally we've been using SoapUI for our API testing. And don't be put off by the name SoapUI. It does cover REST as well. So because we've had a lot of people using SoapUI, for us, it was easier to have the automation built around that. And now going forward, we're actually looking at a homegrown tool called Automatic, which being homegrown, it has a lot of great features for the APIs that we're testing. So us personally, we won't be using LeanFT or UFT for our API testing. What I have seen of both, I would say I think you would be just as good to go in either direction. But I'm going to let someone from Vivid or Micro Focus answer that question, just because I don't have any experience with it.
Very cool. All right, next question. Paul Grossman. I don't even know if you're going to know this answer. He asked us yesterday, does LeanFT support regex of element height or width when getting a collection of elements? Any idea?
I would imagine it does. It's not something I've needed to do. There certainly is a lot of good regex support, and I mean the fact that you're coding in, if you like, a big boy language, like C# or Java or JavaScript even. I can't imagine it would be a problem. The stuff that I've done with I've used the regular expressions in LeanFT in the Object Identification Center, and I had no problems with it there. But that doesn't specifically answer your question, so probably.
Awesome. So another question is, How does the decision to use BDD versus TDD affect the selection and usage of testing tools? Does LeanFT lend itself better to either one?
I think I would say that LeanFT is equally happy in either world. Where you're looking more towards TDD, I think that's more of a need to start involving Cucumber or SpecFlow, but that's outside of the LeanFT side. So I think either world it's equal, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a developer language. It's in their IDE, so I don't know. There's no reason why they can't do red to fail the test and then keep doing it till it passes with TDD. And on the outside, from a QA type perspective, doing the BDD as well. So I agree. Okay, next question. There is a next question.
I've got a good question. Can I have one of your on air lights? I want one of those for my studio.
My wife got it for me for Christmas last year, so I'll find out where she got it.
Great.
We'll see what Vivid can do for you.
All right. Awesome.
All right, Graham. I guess we're almost out of time. We have maybe 2 minutes. I always like to ask everyone I speak to, even on my podcast, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give someone to help them improve their LeanFT testing efforts or implementation that you think would really help them really get ready for 2020?
I think everything, to answer that question, it really is a case of go back and look at the presentation that I did. I know it's going to be available later. The points that, if I'd had the information that I gave there of what information you put into which file, that to me was the hardest challenge. So if you can get that piece and know where to code and what kind of stuff you're going to put in there, that would be the best takeaway from this presentation. And the other part I would say is don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. The support from Micro Focus is great, and I'm hoping that we're going to really build up a community where we can help one another through the tougher challenges.
Awesome. And next time, Graham, if we do this, we need you DJing in the background. I think that'd be awesome.
I'll do it for sure.
Awesome. Thanks so much for all you did, Graham, and thank you for your session, and I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Cheers.